No one expected it. Not here, not in London. But that night, live on air, something snapped. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just told the truth. And suddenly the studio fell silent. Piers Morgan blinked. The control room panicked. A secret recording played and exposed everything. The lies, the setup, the manipulation. You could feel it, the shift. This wasn't just TV, it was a war of narratives. And Africa wasn't backing down. If you're watching this, stop scrolling, like the video, subscribe now. Because what happened next will change the way you see the media forever. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global giants. If you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story in its own voice on its own terms. If you've ever seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt something rise within you, then this story is yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not just to support, but to stand together. Together through a wave of awakening. Because the whispers have turned into a quiet storm. And it's only just beginning, and that's where it began. The moment the cameras blinked red, the trap was already in place. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't greeted with curiosity or respect. He was framed like a man on trial. The table was glass, but the setup was concrete. Every angle chosen, every question weaponized. Across from him, Piers Morgan wore a smile that wasn't warm, it was sharp. Beside him, the host, Mark Dalton, read from cue cards like a man rehearsing a verdict. But the real power didn't sit at the table. It was behind the glass. Charlotte Whitmore, the executive producer, watched everything from the control booth. Her fingers flew across the touchscreen. Zoom in on the silence, she whispered. Make him look unsure. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He let the silence stretch, not because he lacked an answer, but because he knew, when truth arrives, it doesn't shout. It waits. The tension in the room was deliberate. Manufactured. But Traoré didn't fall into the rhythm they had planned. Instead, he broke it. And in that moment, what was supposed to be a performance became a confrontation, not between men, but between manipulation and conviction. The trap was set, but it didn't work. What followed was meant to be demolition. Piers Morgan didn't waste time. He went straight in, calling out the lack of Western-style elections, accusing Captain Ibrahim Traoré of aligning with Russia, silencing critics, and tightening control over media. It was rapid-fire, polished a volley designed to overwhelm. But Traoré didn't rush. He didn't react. He simply leaned forward, voice, steady gaze, fixed. And when he spoke, the temperature in the room changed. You mistake our refusal to imitate your systems, he said, as a rejection of democracy itself. The words hit harder than any shout. Calm, precise, unshakable. Then came the facts. No slogans, no drama, just footage farms once dead, now green classrooms, once empty, now full of children. Data on jobs created, infrastructure built, corruption dismantled. Every image, every number pulled the room further from debate and deeper into reckoning. This wasn't theory, this was delivery. And the people watching in London, across Africa and beyond, began to shift in their seats. What they saw wasn't the authoritarian they'd been told about. It was a man with proof, a man with purpose. And for the first time, the smirk on Piers' face faltered. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had brought more than answers. He had brought reality. Then came the moment no one could have scripted except someone had. As Captain Ibrahim Traoré reached for his tablet, the studio lights seemed to dim ever so slightly. He tapped once. A voice filled the air, but it wasn't his. It wasn't Piers. It was a woman, cool American, commanding. Stir the conflict, don't let him win. Silence, then chaos. The voice wasn't a metaphor. It was real, recorded, clear. And it belonged to Charlotte Whitmore, the executive producer. She had been guiding the show like a puppet master, and now her mask had slipped live for the world to hear. Gasps broke through the audience. Someone whispered, "Did she just say that?" Another voice followed on screen, another clip. "Cut the satellite footage. It's too convincing." In that instant, the illusion shattered. This wasn't a conversation. It was a setup, a manufactured drama, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He had just exposed it without raising his voice. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look surprised. He simply let the truth speak. Piers Morgan sat frozen. The power had left his chair. It now belonged to the man who wasn't supposed to win, the one they had underestimated. And the audience knew it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't need to defend himself. He just stood up, not from his seat, but in presence. While the studio reeled from the leaked recordings, he tapped his tablet once more. The screen behind him lit up again. But there were no patriotic slogans, no grandiose speeches. Instead, it showed villagers building solar panels in dusty courtyards, women soldering wires, teenagers adjusting solar frames with their fathers. These, Traoré said, are not luxury items, they're lifelines. Then came the satellite footage, real-time overlays of Burkina Faso's weather systems, warnings of floods, droughts, crisis zones, students in rural villages learning physics through live-streamed lessons, engineers designing hardware in a Wagogo lab. Every frame quietly answered every accusation. This wasn't about propaganda, it was about survival. Traoré's voice never rose, but his words struck like thunder. Freedom without bread is fiction. Media without integrity is manipulation. He didn't need applause. Still, it came first in whispers, then stronger. Not for performance, but for proof. Piers Morgan stared, visibly shaken. His strategy had melted in the heat of evidence. And Charlotte, high above in the control booth, could only watch as her carefully crafted illusion crumbled beneath the weight of something she couldn't script: truth. The studio no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a reckoning. The moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré lifted his phone one final time, silence fell again, not out of fear, but respect. The LED screen behind him flashed a single sentence in stark white. Disinformation is the fastest road to irrelevance. Truth builds nations. No music, no camera tricks. Just the weight of those words hanging in the air. People stood not to applaud a leader, but to acknowledge a moment that felt rare. Real. A young woman in the audience whispered, "We heard him," before they tried to shut him down. Others nodded, some wept. They hadn't just witnessed a debate, they'd witnessed a mask fall and a voice rise. Piers Morgan had no reply. The lines were gone, the posture crumbling. Charlotte's chair sat empty, her headset discarded like a weapon no longer useful, and Traoré. He didn't celebrate. He simply stepped forward, calm as ever, and said, "Truth doesn't need permission. It only needs the courage to be spoken and the decency to be heard." The audience wasn't clapping anymore. They were standing, not as spectators, but as citizens. Because in that room something old had ended, and something true had begun. It ended without fireworks, but with something far more powerful. A stillness, a collective breath. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't declare victory. He didn't need to. The room had already shifted. Piers Morgan sat quietly, his signature sharpness dulled by a confrontation he hadn't expected, not with anger, but with truth. What Traoré delivered wasn't a defense of power. It was a vision of sovereignty, of self-reliance, of dignity reclaimed. He reminded the world that Africa does not need saving. It needs space to speak, to build, to lead. And that truth, once spoken, cannot be silenced by studio lighting or clever edits. The story didn't end on camera. It began in the homes of viewers who finally saw through the script. It continued in the whispers turned questions, the questions turned conviction. This wasn't about left or right, west or east. It was about who gets to hold the mic and who finally refuses to let it go. And so, if you're still watching, ask yourself this: what kind of world do you want to live in? One built on curated noise, or one grounded in uncomfortable truth? Because tonight, one man chose the latter, and the world was watching. If you still believe that a small nation can stand tall against global powers, if you believe that Africa deserves not only to survive, but to write its own story in its own voice and on its own terms, then this story belongs to you as well. Because what unfolded here was never just a debate. It was a mirror held up to the world, a quiet storm long overdue. And if you've ever seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes, not one of rage, but of conviction, then you already understand what was at stake. So don't just watch in silence, walk with us. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, not merely to show support, but to stand in solidarity. We are not here for applause. We are here to remind the world that truth does not whisper forever, and when it finally speaks, it does not ask for permission. This is not just a broadcast. It is the beginning of a quiet uprising. The whispers have turned into a storm, and we are only just beginning. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's confrontation with Piers Morgan is not just a televised debate. It is a masterclass in leadership dignity and the raw power of unfiltered truth. At its core, this moment teaches us what it means to stand tall in the face of narratives, carefully crafted to belittle, to misrepresent, and to control. It shows that a man with conviction, even when placed in an arena not built for him, can turn the entire game on its head, not with rage, not with retaliation, but with the quiet force of reality. One of the most profound lessons lies in how Traoré chose to respond. He did not match provocation with provocation. He did not dance to the rhythm of the trap. Instead, he slowed everything down. He let silence do its work. In a world addicted to noise, this was a radical act. He showed that sometimes the most powerful response is not to raise your voice, but to raise the standard. His calm dismantled assumptions. His restraint rewrote the rules of engagement. This story also challenges how we define democracy and leadership. Traoré rejected the binary thinking that equates democracy solely with the Western model. He didn't reject democratic values. He rejected foreign templates that serve others more than his people. Through him, we are reminded that systems must be rooted in culture, history, and sovereignty. True representation cannot exist without ownership. It cannot flourish in the shadow of dependency. What he offered was not an excuse, but an alternative built from the ground up, tested in hardship and guided by the needs of the people, not the expectations of the outside world. Another critical lesson is the power of evidence. In a time when words are easily twisted, Traoré came armed with proof, not rhetoric. He showed fields, schools, irrigation jobs, and numbers. He let footage speak. He showed that data is not just cold and analytical. In the right hands, it becomes moral clarity. Leadership today is often accused of being theatrical, but Traoré revealed that when performance meets truth, it transforms into testimony. It shifts from propaganda to proof. This story also offers a brutal exposé on media manipulation. The exposure of Charlotte Whitmore, the hidden architect behind the scenes, unveiled a deeper illness, how stories are framed not to inform, but to steer opinion. Her whispers caught on tape are not isolated. They echo the broader machinery that filters global narratives. What we saw here was not just a moment of sabotage, it was a global metaphor. How many other stories have been edited before they reached us? How often have truth and intent been separated by a producer's decision? This revelation demands vigilance from us all. It reminds us that truth must be questioned not just for what is said, but for why it is being said and who benefits from the saying. Yet perhaps the deepest lesson of all is about courage. Not the loud cinematic courage of battlefield glory, but the everyday courage of standing one's ground with dignity. Captain Traoré reminded us that you do not need perfect English or polished sound bites to lead. You need clarity, you need commitment. You need the courage to walk into a room that wasn't designed for your voice and still speak with power. This is the kind of courage that changes perception, the kind that inspires people not to clap but to think. He also taught us something sacred about leadership, that it is not about dominating a room, but transforming it. At the start of the interview, the room belonged to Piers Morgan. By the end, it belonged to the audience, and Traoré simply stood among them, not above them. He did not take control, he earned it. That distinction is subtle, but it is everything. It is the difference between influence and imposition. The final moments of the encounter delivered one last lesson, that truth does not require permission. It only needs space. When Traoré tapped his phone and exposed the manipulation behind the scenes, he did so without grandstanding. He let the room react. And what followed, the standing ovations, the silence, the shift in tone, was not manufactured. It was earned. That is the power of integrity. It doesn't coerce belief. It invites reflection. And when the truth finally landed, it didn't just dismantle a media segment, it unmasked a system. This story teaches us that resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to bow. Sometimes it answers a loaded question with a loaded fact. And sometimes it shows up not to argue, but to illuminate. For viewers across the world, especially in Africa, this wasn't just about a man. It was about reclaiming voice. It was about seeing someone speak, not for them, but with them. It was about the possibility of a future in which leaders are not chosen for how well they echo foreign praise, but for how deeply they root themselves in their people's struggle. To the young viewer who has been told their story doesn't matter, this moment proves it does. To the journalist who still believes in ethics, this moment calls you higher. To the citizen exhausted by politics as performance, this moment offers proof that substance still exists. And to every small nation that has been made to feel irrelevant, this moment is your mirror. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not win the debate because he destroyed his opponent. He won because he didn't flinch when the truth became inconvenient, and he didn't run when power pushed back. That is a lesson we all need, not only in politics, not only in Africa, but in every conversation where honesty struggles to be heard. Because at the end of the day, truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be spoken. And when it is, the world listens. The comments flooded in almost instantly after the broadcast ended. Not the usual surface-level reactions, but something deeper, something different. Viewers from across the world, Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, even parts of South Asia wrote, not just to react, but to reckon. What they had just witnessed wasn't simply a debate. It felt, as one user put it, like watching a dam break quietly. Many admitted they had tuned in expecting yet another confrontation between a Western host and a controversial African leader. What they got instead was an unmasking of systems of media of their own assumptions. One viewer from Kenya wrote, "For the first time, I saw an African leader stand in a Western studio and not shrink to fit their frame. Traoré didn't defend, he redefined." Another comment, liked thousands of times, simply read, "He didn't raise his voice because the truth doesn't have to shout." A journalist from London, visibly shaken in her vlog recap, said, "I work in the media. I've worked with producers like Charlotte. This was too familiar. The manipulation, the framing, and the moment it all fell apart, I felt ashamed." It wasn't just Africans who were moved. British citizens, some openly critical of mainstream media, found themselves questioning everything. If this is how they treat Traoré on camera, one viewer posted, "Imagine what they never let us see." Among diaspora communities, especially in France and the UK, the reaction was visceral. "I grew up hearing my father talk about Sankara." A commenter from Marseille wrote, "Tonight I felt that spirit again, calm, sharp, unbought." Someone else responded underneath, "Traoré made me proud to be African again, not because he's perfect, but because he's honest." Some viewers focused on the symbolism, the tablet, the leaked audio, the silence that followed. "He didn't just expose Charlotte," one viewer said. "He exposed the architecture of how narratives are built against us. And he did it without breaking character." Another called it the most important 2 minutes of television this decade. But it wasn't just admiration, it was introspection. A Nigerian teacher posted, "Why did it take me this long to question the way African leaders are portrayed? I realize now how easy it is to internalize the voices that speak over us. The post was shared widely, triggering a flood of similar confessions. I always thought Burkina Faso was too small to matter, wrote a South African user. But tonight, it spoke for all of us. The comments also turned towards Western hypocrisy. Piers asked why people can't eat solar panels, someone replied. But no one asked the same when the West funds missiles instead of meals. Another posted, funny how infrastructure becomes suspicious when it's built by Africans for Africans. Some viewers were emotional, truly emotional. I cried, wrote a woman from Ghana, not because of pity, but because I recognized my own silence. I've been afraid to hope. Traore made me believe again. That post gained over 20,000 likes within the first 2 hours. Dozens responded with stories of how they watched the broadcast with their children pointing to Traore and saying, "This is how we speak truth with dignity." A recurring theme emerged: hunger for truth. "We've had enough of curated outrage and edited narratives," someone wrote. "Tonight felt like something real slipped through the cracks and we saw it." Another added, "This was more than a man defending his country. It was a nation refusing to be spoken for." Young people especially reacted to the data-driven approach. He didn't rant, he showed footage, facts, progress. "I've never seen an African leader use tech to tell a story like that," wrote a 22-year-old student from Uganda. Others noted the impact of the leaked control room audio. "Once you hear that voice stir the conflict, you can't unhear it. It changes how you watch everything." One powerful comment simply read, "They tried to turn him into a headline. He turned himself into a movement." But perhaps the most striking commentary came not in words, but in tone. There was no chaos in the replies, no trolling, no shouting matches, just a quiet wave of respective clarity. A man in the Caribbean wrote, "This wasn't television, it was vindication," and still others focused on what comes next. "The broadcast is over, but the questions remain." Someone commented, "Who else have they silenced? What other voices did we never hear?" Calls for broader reforms in media framing and coverage of the Global South began to spread. Activists, writers, educators shared the video with captions like "required viewing." Even quiet viewers began sharing the moment Traore said, "Freedom without bread is fiction." That quote in particular became a rallying cry. And yet, through all of it, no one called Traore flawless. That wasn't the point. As one viewer put it, this isn't about perfection, it's about presence. About someone finally standing in the fire and refusing to be burned. Another echoed it with, "We're not looking for saints. We're looking for people who don't sell us out." As the night went on, clips circulated, hashtags trended. Traore truth, Ashur Africa speaks. Back, our Charlotte exposed. But more than that, something quieter began to grow. A kind of trust, a kind of reckoning. The viewers had watched a story try to be controlled and watched it break free. And in that release, they saw not just a leader, they saw themselves. A man in the Caribbean wrote, "This wasn't television, it was vindication," and still others focused on what comes next. "The broadcast is over, but the questions remain." Someone commented, "Who else have they silenced? What other voices did we never hear?" Calls for broader reforms in media framing and coverage of the Global South began to spread. Activists, writers, educators shared the video with captions like "required viewing." Even quiet viewers began sharing the moment Traore said, "Freedom without bread is fiction." That quote in particular became a rallying cry. And yet, through all of it, no one called Traore flawless. That wasn't the point. As one viewer put it, this isn't about perfection, it's about presence. About someone finally standing in the fire and refusing to be burned. Another echoed it with, "We're not looking for saints. We're looking for people who don't sell us out." As the night went on, clips circulated, hashtags trended. Traore truth, Ashur Africa speaks. Back, our Charlotte exposed. But more than that, something quieter began to grow. A kind of trust, a kind of reckoning. The viewers had watched a story try to be controlled and watched it break free. And in that release they saw not just a leader, they saw themselves.